Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be doing a combination of the female feedback loop, and I'm going to combine it with the picture of the ovary and kind of explain what's happening in the brain, how our brain connects to the ovary. So the very first thing that's going to happen is in our hypothalamus, which is about right here, we're going to see the hypothalamus. I'll just label it. Hypothalamus is going to release a hormone called GnRH. So GnRH is going to basically be released at the beginning of puberty and continue being released anytime this process occurs. So that is going to go from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, which is just the front part of the pituitary gland right there. And the anterior pituitary is going to release our very first hormone. Our very first hormone that is released in the female feedback loop is FSH. So FSH is going to go into our blood, and it's going to travel all the way through our blood down into the ovary. This is a picture of the ovary. And it's going to go specifically in the ovary into the follicle. So the follicle is basically this guy right here. So we're just going to say right here. The follicle is going to start to develop, and as it develops, it's going to increase the estrogen that's being produced from the ovary. So as it increases estrogen, estrogen has a really important job. It does three important things. So first of all, it thickens the endometrial lining. So that would be back in the uterus. It's going to do that. It also helps with secondary sex characteristics, which are basically things that allow females to look female. And this last thing that it does is a positive and a negative feedback. So it's going to turn off FSH and it's going to turn on the next hormone, which is LH. So it's going to be a negative feedback and a positive feedback going back to the anterior pituitary. So again, the hormone estrogen is going to be released into the blood. It increases the amount, and that's going to trigger the anterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland is going to say, okay, estrogen has increased. That means I need to move on in the menstrual cycle. So I'm going to turn off FSH and I'm going to turn on LH. So once I turn on LH, that's the second hormone, LH, you're going to see it going down back into the ovary. And at this point, we're going to have our follicle looking kind of like this, because as it was going through these orange stages, it was developing, turning into that. So basically, in the ovary, eventually it's going to see that increase in LH, and it's going to cause this stage to happen, which is the ova released from the follicle. Okay, that is called ovulation. It happens on day 14. So after that follicle is released, we're going to move into a different stage, and the follicle tissue that's left over without the ovum is going to transform into something called the corpus luteum. So you can see in the picture here, it looks a little bit different. I kind of make it look like either like a piece of popcorn or maybe like kind of a wilted flower. So the follicle now is called the corpus luteum. And when it's called the corpus luteum, we see an increase in progesterone. Okay, progesterone levels are going to increase. So when that happens, it does three things. So first of all, it tells the uterus to stop contracting. Okay, the whole idea behind this is we've just released an ovum. Okay, we don't want, if the ova is released, we don't want the uterus to start contracting to get rid of that endometrial lining that we've been building up all month. So we're going to stop uterine contractions to make sure that the endometrial lining stays there. We're also going to make sure the endometrial lining stays nice and thick, or thickens a little bit, okay, with the progesterone. So we're going to do that as well. And we're also going to stop any further ovulation. Okay, we want to put all of our eggs in one basket, and we're going to try really hard to fertilize that one egg. Okay, yeah, there's twins that are born in triplets and stuff like that, but that's not ideal conditions for a baby to grow. We're going to try to make sure that the baby that is growing has the entire uterus to grow with, and if an an egg was released later, that potentially could cause the two babies to be growing at different rates, which could end up being difficult for the one baby to have as much nutrients, and when they're born to be as developed as the first one. So that's kind of what's happening here. The corpus luteum is hanging out. We're just releasing all of these good progesterone levels. It's stopping uterine contractions. We're making sure the endometrial lining is good to go, and we're inhibiting inhibiting ovulation. So eventually over time, this egg has about 2 days to be fertilized, and if it doesn't, okay, what's going to happen is the corpus luteum is not going to get a signal from the uterus saying that the egg has implanted. So what's going to happen is our corpus luteum is going to start to decrease in size. So go like this and then like that. And as it decreases in size, the progesterone levels drop. So when the progesterone levels drop, this is our negative feedback to tell the hypothalamus to basically stop this process. Okay, tell the anterior pituitary to stop this process. And it would basically start the process over. Okay, so flow phase would begin, which happens from days 1 to 5. So we would start this process again as the endometrial lining is shedding. Okay, you can't see the uterus in this picture, but as the endometrial lining is shedding, the hypothalamus is releasing GnRH, telling the anterior pituitary to start releasing FSH again. Okay, that is flow phase. Takes about 1 to 5 days. Then we're going to move into follicular phase. Follicular phase is when FSH is released and tells the follicle to start developing. So this takes about days 16 to 13 happening. So it's all the orange stuff. We're having a really large increase in estrogen, which does all this good stuff. And then we eventually flip back to the anterior pituitary gland and go into ovulation. So the day that the ovary is actually releasing the egg is called ovulation. And then after ovulation happens, we move into the last phase, which is called luteal phase. So basically from that day that we release the ovum, which is called ovulation, we go through the luteal phase, which is dominated by the corpus luteum. That's why it's called luteal phase. And that is about day 15 to 28. So that's kind of a combination of what's happening all together in our brain / our ovary / our uterus / our blood.